The Handkerchief, written by Gr8T78. Harry Potter and the Wizarding World is the sole masterpiece of J.K. Rowling. Chapter 37. There's never good news in the middle of the night. 30 minutes later, the bats had finally stopped streaming from his nostrils, and their urine was mercifully blown into the pink tissues in the frilly lace box on Professor Umbridge's desk. Only Millie and Edwina had woken up. Vince and Warrington looked to be out for the night. Draco sent the girls back to the Slytherin common room and said he was sure that Professor Umbridge would call if they were needed again. Draco clattered back down the stairs to Professor Snape's office, meeting him just outside of the Slytherin common room. Snape pulled him inside a nearby broom cupboard and closed the door. Draco tried not to think about all of the lewdness that had probably happened in this broom cupboard. Unbidden, an image jumped into his mind of holding Hermione close and kissing her neck, his hands ghosting over the soft skin of her thigh just under her skirt. The image seemed so real that for a very brief moment, he nearly forgot that he was standing practically nose to nose with his professor. Professor Snape sighed heavily. "Your clemency, Draco." "Sorry." Draco pictured rows upon rows of vials, bottles, stoppered flasks, cauldrons bubbling and stirring sticks. "Thank you. Now, where is Potter?" "I don't know." He and Hermione took Professor Umbridge into the Forbidden Forest. "I think they're hoping that something gnarly of Hagrid's is going to take her out for them." "Yes, there's likely a thing or two that would do that," Professor Snape smirked. "And the rest of them? Are Warrington and the others still holding them?" "No, they all got away. I mentioned to them before they fought back where Potter and Granger went, so perhaps they went to find them." "We need to find Potter." "I've spoken with Sirius, and he's fine. I don't know what the Dark Lord showed Potter, but I'm afraid that he might act upon it." Mercifully, Snape opened the door and exited, and Draco, glad to escape the cupboard, followed the professor. The two wizards hurried into the Forbidden Forest, and Draco wondered yet again why they had to go in here when it was growing dark. Could nothing be done in daylight? "Oh." After a moment, Snape halted, throwing out an arm to stop Draco. They listened, and soon a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness next to them. Draco forgot to breathe for a moment. It was a centaur. His red hair and beard fell over a muscular man's chest, which turned into a muscular chestnut-colored horse body. Draco was disturbed when the thought occurred to him that this centaur looked like a really jacked Weasley brother in horse form. "Hello, Ronan," said Snape in greeting. "Have you seen a group of our students?" "They were here, Severus." "They have departed. They spoke of going to the ministry in London." Snape grimaced. Did they take brooms? Draco was sure it would be a long and miserable broom ride to London from here. "No, some of Hagrid's nice Thestrals came for them. There was an older witch as well. Pink clothes and a hair bow. Where is she?" "Ah, yes. Several in our herd found her presence. Distasteful. She was taken away by some of the more aggressive of our kin. I feel certain that she will live, however." Draco suppressed a laugh. Snape eyed him sharply, but Draco couldn't help but notice that the older wizard also fought to keep his face expressionless. Ronan continued, "I believe the giant was mostly unharmed as well." Now Snape's eyebrows rose into his hair. "Giant." "Oh." Hours passed. After several messages to Hermione on his handkerchief went unanswered, Draco felt himself going spare. He had called his mother, hoping to find her alone. After talking with her, he wished instead that his father had been with her. "Draco." "Oh, heavens, I'm so glad to see you're safe." Narcissa had been crying, her hair hung in lank pieces indicating that she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. "Mum, what's going on? Did something happen?" "Your Anne." "Bellatrix, she came for your father. There were several of them, 12 or so altogether. Bellatrix's husband and his brother, Wendell Crabbe. Some I didn't know." Where did they go?" Draco faltered, afraid of the answers. "Bellatrix said that there was a job at the ministry, that they were needed. She said the Dark Lord was sending them." "Odds, Draco, It's starting all over again. Narcissa's voice cracked, tears ran and checked down her cheeks. Just before she left, she said, "Thank you for sending me Alf." Draco, I think Creature may have helped her. Mom. Draco felt the back of his throat tighten, his own eyes begin to burn. He began to whisper, afraid that as he spoke normally, it would come out as a wail of despair. Mom. She went there. Tonight. With Potter. Narcissa drew in a sharp breath. My dragon. I'm so sorry. The tears slipped down his cheeks in earnest now. Mom, what do you think will happen? His voice wavered. Narcissa could only whisper, I don't know. She pressed the palms of her hands flat against her face, as though willing the tears back inside. Draco. Tell me you've been practicing occlumency with Severus. If you can't hide this, love, I don't know what will become of us. I have. I feel I've nearly mastered it. Mentally, Draco began breaking down the events of the night into elements, ingredients, extractions. He corked and stoppered, labeled and categorized. He had to do this. For her. Oh. Finally, at 3:00 in the morning, his handkerchief grew warm. He'd had it resting between his cheek and his hand, pressed against the pillow, fitfully willing himself to sleep. Then willing himself to stay awake when the nightmare started. We are safe. In hospital wing. Come when you can. He leaped out of bed, still fully dressed from the day before, sliding his feet silently into his shoes. Just as he reached for the door, he looked over at the wizard to his right. Blaze had not slept well that night either, and Draco had a feeling he knew why. Luna Lovegood had been with the group that had disappeared unexpectedly right after examinations. He reached out, touching the wizard on the arm. Blaze opened his eyes without startling. They came back. I think they are in the hospital wing if you want to come with me, he whispered. Blaze rose without a word, tugging on a robe over his pajamas and slipping his feet into his shoes. As they walked as quietly as possible up the stairs to the hospital wing, Blaze asked quietly, Do you know where they went? The Department of Mysteries at the Ministry. My father and my aunt were there also. Draco stopped, putting a hand on Blaze's shoulder. Mate, I don't know what happened, if anyone got hurt. Her message only said we are safe, not who that we is. Blaze nodded stoically, and they continued, reaching the hospital wing doors. Snape was sitting outside the doors as guard. I've been expecting you, was all he said in greeting as he stood. You have 10 minutes. Use silencing charms. The Weasleys and Longbottom have taken sleeping drafts, but there is no guarantee. Potter? Draco asked. Still talking with the headmaster, Snape clipped out brusquely. So Dumbledore had also returned. They had all come back alive. Snape opened the door and allowed them to pass inside. A small pool of light illuminated Luna, who was sitting up, awake. He had to search for Hermione's Ritus curls in the semi-darkness for a moment until he found them. He felt Blaze moved quickly past him towards Luna, and he made his way to his witch. She was lying on her right side, bandages wrapped almost everywhere he could see. On her bedside table, 6 potion bottles were neatly lined up. She wore hospital pajamas and held the handkerchief tightly in her hand. Draco! She gasped, then winced hard, laying a hand lightly on her side. My, what the hell? Why did you go there? He can already hear the tears forming in his voice, and he fought to keep them down. I was so worried. I called my mother, she said Lucius and Bellatrix were there. My God, you could have been killed. Close, she grimaced with an attempt at humor. Please don't joke. I don't know what I would do if. We made it back. It was a trap, a trick of Voldemort to draw Harry out. But we all came back. Well, no, your cousin Sirius. Draco, I overheard Professor Lupin say that he didn't make it. My God, Harry is going to be so upset. I'm so very sorry. Draco was surprised to find himself incredibly saddened at this. Sirius was a cousin he had never met, and now he would never get the chance. He had been the oldest living male of the Black family line, a dubious honor that now fell to Draco. He knew that Sirius had not seen eye to eye with the rest of the Blacks, and thinking back to the visits with Walburga of the Truling, the yellowed teeth and elf head hooks, he understood why. Sirius had been someone with whom Draco could have identified, someone who had emerged from the Sacred 28 and fought on the side of good. Now, Draco would never know him. And in just a short time, less than a year from now when he reached 17, he would be known officially as Lord Black. It's all right, Mai. The important thing is that you made it back. How badly are you hurt? He cupped her face, then took her hands in his. It's not so bad. I was hit with a curse, but the caster wasn't able to speak it aloud because of my silencing charm. But to be frank, it is not good. Her wince belied her words. It seemed quite terribly bad, in fact. Was the caster, was it my Draco's silver eyes could not meet hers. He realized his grip was too strong, and slackened his hold on her hands. No. It was Dolohov. But Draco, everyone was taken to Azkaban. The oars came with Minister Fudge. They captured everyone except Bellatrix and Voldemort. They escaped. Your father was good. He kissed her goodnight, smoothing back her hair from her forehead, straightening her sheets and fluffing her pillows. He knew that tomorrow she would spend her day with Potter and the others, and within a few days, they would be back on the train to London. This could possibly be the last private moments they would have for a long time. Tomorrow, everything would change. There would be news articles, photographs splashed across Wizarding Britain. Tomorrow, lines would be drawn and sides would be chosen. His father, his reputation, his name would be tarnished, under scrutiny, under the boot heel of the ministry, dragged through the mud. For not the first time in his life, Draco wished that he did not have to carry the mantle of Malfoy. He met Blaise at the door, and they left together. Professor Snape stopped them just outside. Draco, Madame Pomfrey needs a large quantity of very difficult-to-brew potions to treat Miss Granger's injuries. As you have expressed an interest in a career in potions, I thought perhaps you could assist me in their preparation. Yes, Professor, I'd like to help. Very much so. Very well. Meet me in my office at 9 tomorrow morning. As he and Blaise made their way to the dungeons, the relief at being able to do something, anything to help her, was immeasurable. Luna okay? He asked with a graciousness and relief he hadn't felt an hour before. I'm not sure what you mean. Who? Blaise gave a half smile. Don't play dumb with me, mate. It doesn't take a Legilimens to read that situation, Draco smirked. Blaise's smile widened. She's perfect. Oh. As he and Blaise entered the Slytherin common room, a small movement caught his eye. Dobby was waiting up for them. Blaise waved good night and set off for their dormitory, leaving him with the elf. Draco Malfoy. Dobby's friend Tiffy asked Dobby to come. Mistress Narcissa needs to speak with Draco tonight. Thank you, Dobby, Draco said, and the elf popped away. Oh. Draco. Narcissa looked even worse than she had hours before. Mum. I heard he was taken, Draco said somberly. Yes. But Draco. When Bellatrix and the Dark Lord escaped, they came here. Narcissa's voice struggled to maintain her composure. Now it was Draco's turn to nearly lose control of himself. What do you mean? He whisper-shouted. Bellatrix said that because Lucius failed to secure whatever it was they were seeking there, that to make up for this grievous mistake, we should act as hosts for the Dark Lord. She and who arrived here a few hours ago and demanded rooms. He brought a snake. This last part was delivered with disgust and disbelief, as though this were the worst part of the news. Mother, Mum, they can't. I'm afraid that they have, Draco. We're going to need to maintain constant vigilance while they stay here. I don't know what to do. Draco, there are dark plans for the future, and I'm worried for you. What do you mean, Mum? He asked, a sinking feeling in his stomach. Bella says that because Sirius is you're going to be considered the head of the House of Black, and with Lucius imprisoned, you're the head of the House of Malfoy as well. And as such, you'll need to stand in for Lucius. A wave of nausea washed over him, and he fought to stay upright. Mum, please. Tears began falling from his eyes, small hisses of green steam rising up as they fell into the fireplace grate below him. My dragon, Narcissa wept. Oh. He had not slept, having paced the common room for the past few hours until other students began coming in to head to breakfast. It was hard to believe that most people were going about their day as usual, looking forward to a bit of relaxation until the train departed. Vince and Greg were seated on their beds when he finally entered the dormitory to change. He still wore the robes, shirt, and pants from the day before. It was hard to believe he'd worn this for his history of magic exam. He'd hoped to steal away after the exam and find a secluded spot somewhere along the shores of the Black Lake to sit with Hermione. Was that only yesterday? Draco. You heard? They caught our fathers. My father, something happened to him. They aren't sure if he'll be okay, Crabbe said angrily. I'm sorry to hear that, Draco said mechanically. Theo was lying on his bed atop the bedclothes on his side, facing away from them. He had pulled a pillow over his head as though to block out everything. "Let's go eat," Greg said, and for once, Draco couldn't be arsed to take the piss out on him for wanting to eat. As they exited the stairs from the dungeon, Draco saw Potter ahead, looking troubled but physically unhurt. Draco's breath caught in his chest. Potter, who was stupid enough to fall for a trick of the Dark Lord. Potter, who had gotten his cousin killed before Draco could ever even meet him, thrusting Draco into a head-of-house role. Potter, who had gotten Lucius arrested, forcing Draco to take his place at the Dark Lord's side. Potter, who had nearly gotten Hermione killed. For this last thing alone, Draco could happily tear the bastard limb from limb. "You're dead, Potter." Draco stared at him in cold fury. "Funny, you'd think I'd have stopped walking around." Potter drawled. "You're going to pay," said Draco angrily. He felt his composure slipping and fought to control it. "I'm going to make you pay for what you've done," he said. "To my father," he then added, feeling the menacing forms of Vince and Greg at his sides. "Well, I'm terrified now," said the Prat. "I suppose Lord Voldemort's just a warm-up act compared to you three." Vince and Greg made startled noises. "What's the matter? He's your dad's mate, isn't he?" "Oh." Professor Snape already had several cauldrons going when he entered the potions laboratory after meeting Potter in the entrance hall. Snape set to briskly chopping potion ingredients. He paused when Draco just stood there, fuming. He was still seething from his encounter with Potter. "Draco, I've spoken with your mother. I regret to hear of the situation in which you find yourself." Draco only nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak of it. "Just know this, Draco. No matter what is asked of you, no matter the situation you find yourself in, you must keep control of your own mind. If that is taken away from you, all may be lost." The two wizards locked eyes for several moments, then Draco looked away to gather himself. "What does Madame Pomfrey need, sir?" Rows upon rows of bottled vials. Stoppered flasks, labeled and neatly stored away. Ingredients, evenly chopped and placed in identical containers. Draco felt himself sink into the potions cupboard of his mind, and he began to work. "Oh." As the Hogwarts Express pulled away from Hogsmeade, Draco's sense of foreboding grew. He looked around the compartment. Most of the Slytherins inside had fathers currently in Azkaban. He needed air. "I'm taking a walk," he announced to no one in particular, then sighed deeply when Vince and Greg stood as well. "You don't have to come," he snapped at them. "We gotta stick together now, Draco," said Vince softly. Draco could only give him a look of surprised appreciation. "Okay," he answered simply. When they came upon Potter's group, the other boys insisted on trying to mess with him. Draco joined in, knowing it would not end well for them, but not particularly caring. If Potter went ahead and finished him off, there wouldn't be much left for the Dark Lord, at least. But Potter's crew was ready. The Jinxes came from in front of and behind them, and in a trice, Draco found himself rolling on the floor, his body temporarily transfigured into some sort of slug. Surprisingly, it was an improvement over the Bat Bogey hex. At least the train ride was quiet now. The view from the floor wasn't so bad, he thought. Oh. Hours later, they pulled into the station at King's Cross, and Draco watched from the ground as Potter's group trooped out onto the platform. "Finite incantatem," a familiar voice rang out. Vince and Greg jumped up, hurrying away without a glance back. "Thanks, my." Draco pulled himself stiffly from the ground where he had been laying as a boneless slug for quite a while. They stepped back into the compartment for privacy. "You're welcome. Please don't go around picking fights with anyone else this summer," she implored jokingly. She removed the handkerchief from her cuff and dabbed at the slime in his hair. "I would never." He chuckled, drawing her into his arms. Tenderly, gently, in a way that he hoped said more than mere words could, Draco kissed her goodbye. It was, he feared, an ending, and not just of the school year. Never would there be this innocence, this openness between them again. He only hoped that wasn't the end of them. Reaching into his breast pocket, he took out his own handkerchief and dried her tears. Oh. Chapter 38. The Two Choices. An Ugly Handbag or a Leather Knapsack. His mother met him at platform 9 3/4 with a tight smile and an even tighter hug. "Draco, darling, I'm so happy that you're home. It's going to be a wonderful summer, even if your father isn't able to join us immediately. You'll be happy to know that we have some lovely house guests, I'm certain you'll find them delightful. Mother, what are you talking about? I thought you said. Draco, please do not interrupt me when I'm speaking. Now, do you recall the restaurant at which we ate last summer when I collected you from King's Cross? Perhaps we could go there again, just the two of us. I thought it might be fun. Draco was thoroughly confused. The previous year, he had been met by Pim at the platform. It had been a summer day. Nearly all of the students who had remained for the leaving feast were quiet and listless, still trying to process the idea of Cedric Diggory's death. But his mother was staring at him intently. Clearly she was trying to tell him something without so many words. But, my dragon, we should transfigure your robes into Muggle clothing and send the trunks on ahead to the manor. It would not do to be seen in Muggle London with a load of steamer trunks floating behind us, now would it? She gave a tinkling laugh. As much as I dislike associating with Muggles, I know it's necessary at times. I can't recall what kind of dessert you had, darling. Was it the chocolate or the orange? What was she talking about? Mother had little compunction about going into Muggle cities for shopping or museums or dining. A Muggle shop might not be her first choice in places to visit, but there were certain shops in Paris, Milan, and Tokyo in which she could easily get lost. But Draco could feel the need to play along with her to figure out what was going on. Yes, good idea, I remember that place, it was quite good. If I'm not mistaken, I had the chocolate, he agreed. He looked past his mother and saw Hermione, the Weasleys, and a handful of others, including Professors Moody and Lupin, all speaking to Potter and some Muggles. Presumably, this was Potter's Muggle family. The woman was normally sized, if a little long in the neck. Meanwhile, the man and the boy looked as though they could be Vincent Crabbe's relatives. Excellent, then, allow me to fix your robes. With a few flourishes of her wand, Draco now stood in trainers and jeans, his white Oxford shirt transformed into a white t-shirt. Merlin, he didn't think his mother even knew what jeans and trainers were. He stepped from behind his mother so that he was in full view of Hermione, who had turned and was staring open-mouthed at him. He quirked an eyebrow at her and gave her a small smile, glad that she was enjoying the view. Oh no, I've messed up this collar, let me try it again. She put down the large handbag she was carrying in her right hand and stood closer to Draco, leaning in with her wand in hand. Without moving her lips or indeed barely making a sound, Draco heard her say, "My bag." He looked down at her bag more carefully now. It truly was an ugly bit of fashion. He had never known his mother to choose such a garish pattern before. At once, some parts of the puzzle clicked together. Based on the ugly pattern of this bag alone, he was sure it did not belong to her. She must have been forced to carry it, as she would have never volunteered to do so. He felt the collar of the t-shirt change slightly under her touch, then looked her in the eye. Her eyes darted down to the large handbag on her right, then to Draco's trunks on the ground to his right. Now, let's send your trunks ahead to the manor, she said brightly, her eyes darting back and forth once more between the bags, practically pleading with him to understand. A fine idea, Mother. But are you certain you want to be carrying that large bag around in Muggle London? Some jumped-up filthy Muggle might try to steal it. I know that Muggles are quite devious. It wouldn't surprise me if it was taken. Would you like to send it ahead with my trunks? I have galleons that I can transfigure into Muggle money. You have no need for that bag. I don't know, Draco, I'm not sure that's the best idea, Narcissa said, but the smile and relief upon her face was clearly evident. She gave him a small nod as if to say, yes, you've done well. No, Mother, I insist. I don't want you to become a target of some dirty Muggles. He picked up the offending bag, which weighed far less than he assumed it would, and placed it upon the stack of trunks. He gestured to her to send them ahead to the manor, which she did quickly without another word. Turning back to him, all pretense and gaiety dropped, she said, let's leave here, quickly. This way. Oh. They exited platform 9 3/4, then King's Cross Station, crossing the road and walking a short distance until they reached a Muggle hotel. Narcissa turned inside and marched to the front desk as though she had been there countless times before. As she passed a small writing desk near the front door, she wandlessly summoned a piece of stationery from it, whipping up a small wind to make it look as though it had floated to her sheerly by accident. Gesturing minutely with her wand inside of her sleeve, she held it out to the man behind the reception counter. This is my reservation. May I have my keys to my room? Yes, Mrs. Phineas. Here are your keys, have a lovely stay. Draco watched in awed silence as his mother pressed a button on the wall and a set of doors rumbled open. She stepped inside the small cupboard, gesturing him inside. The doors closed suddenly, and Draco felt a swooping feeling in his stomach. When the doors opened again, there was a different corridor outside, and Draco realized that it was an elevator, though much more modern and gilded than the ones in the Ministry of Magic. But his mother was striding down the hall now, and he hurried to keep up. They reached a door numbered 546, and she inserted the key and strode inside. Locking the door behind her, she took out her wand and began to ward the room, throwing up privacy charms, silencing charms, muggle-repelling charms. Notice me not charms. Draco stood back in confusion and watched. When she seemed satisfied that the job was complete, Narcissa turned to him. Draco, I've decided that it is best if you were to disappear into the Muggle world. I have reached out to someone that can help. They will get you into America and help you create a new identity there. What? Draco's mind was a blank. What was his mother talking about? We will say that you ran away from me at the restaurant and that I tried to get you back and failed. Or perhaps some muggles took you. I think they sometimes will do that. They call it kidnapping, I believe. Mom, forgive me, but what the hell is happening right now? Draco grabbed his mother by the hands in an effort to calm her. The Dark Lord is at the manor with Bellatrix and the snake right now. They cannot be seen out, of course. Bellatrix will not lower herself by taking Paula juice, and the Dark Lord is no longer able to take it. It is only meant to be consumed by it will no longer work for him. They're suspicious of me, so they've had Peter Pettigrew stay with me in his animagus form. He was inside that handbag. It's why I wanted you to put it with your things to send back. I knew if it had been my idea, they would know that I was trying to trick them, trying to get you out. When and where are we going? Draco began pacing the room. He needed to contact Hermione, get her to convince her parents to go with them as well. Blaise and Theo might be persuaded to join them. Hermione would likely want to help Potter and the Weasley family escape. Too, it would be difficult to smuggle that many people out. But gold usually made things happen more easily, and the entire Black and Malfoy vaults were at his disposal right now. Who is we? Narcissa asked sharply. You. Me. Hermione. Our friends who don't wish to follow the Dark Lord's lead. Draco was wide-eyed. There was so much to do. No, my dragon. I cannot leave. Lucius will be returning home soon. If he returns and I am not here, he will seek me until he finds me. And here, Narcissa faltered. If you take the girl, the Dark Lord will find out. He heard from Peter about how close the Potter boy is to her. If she disappears at the same time that you do, he will figure it out. He will kill us all and then hunt you down to make you an example as a blood traitor. Draco, you must go alone. That will be dangerous enough as it is. We don't have much time. I have a British bank account in your name with 5,000 British pounds. Here is the checkbook. An American bank account book with 600,000 US dollars. It's all I could pull together on short notice. Later, I can try to transfer more. Here's a passport and identity card. You'll be 9 years old now according to these, but that will make you an adult in the mundane world, so I think it will be best. These items were all thrust into a small leather knapsack while Draco simply stood there, unmoving. Ted is waiting downstairs to take you to Heathrow, Narcissa finished hurriedly, moving to put the strap of the bag on his shoulder. Please, Draco, there is no other way. Mum, I can't. You know I can't. What? Draco, no. You do not understand, you have no idea. You have to leave. Mom, I can't leave without her. Or you. Draco. His mother had grown deathly calm now. It unnerved him. The frantic, panicking Narcissa made sense under the circumstances. This ice-cool demeanor at this time, in this place, it chilled him far more than the frenzy had. I think you know that my chances of getting out of this alive are quite slim. All I'm hoping to do is to go back and buy you enough time, a few hours, perhaps to leave the country through the untraceable mundane world. I know what's going to happen to me, and I'm ready for it if it means you're safe. It would be my greatest triumph as a mother to ensure your safety. But as for Hermione, do you really think she will leave, run away and leave Potter? Darling, she's a Gryffindor. I have known several Gryffindors, as I'm sure you have as well. Have you ever known them to back away from a fight? He paused and thought of 11-year-old Neville scrapping with him at the Quidditch pitch. 2 Weasleys zooming on brooms, spraying swamp sap at Umbridge. Another younger Weasley offering to be Potter's second in a duel. And still a different Weasley casting the bat bogey hex directly into his face. 14-year-old Potter appearing at the side of a maze, clutching his dead friend and telling everyone that Voldemort is back. And Hermione defending house elves and hippogriffs, saving classmates from evil creatures in secret chambers. Fighting back against Millie Bulstrode, slapping him in the face, following Potter on a Thistral to fight Voldemort. Draco put his face in his hands. No, she won't go. Exactly. But you must go. Mum. I can't. I can't leave her. And if there's a chance that I can help her, I have to. Narcissa lowered herself to the bed in the center of the room. After a moment, she rose and walked to a box on a nearby table. She lifted a portion of the top of the box, which was attached to the bottom with a long spiral cord. Pressing a square on the front of the box, she spoke aloud. Ted, he won't go. The plan is off. She paused, listening, then sighed heavily. Yes, I know. Please tell Andrew thank you for everything. She placed the top of the box back on the bottom. I'm sending him away. I don't want anyone to see him with us if it can be helped. Who? Draco asked. It's not your concern. Let us go. Narcissa vanished the leather knapsack and dried her tears, then held out her arm for sidle-on apparition. They appeared just outside the manor gates. Narcissa turned to him. Put up your walls, my dragon. You'll need them here. Oh. Chapter 39. Houseguest Hardships. Draco, darling Nephi Kittles, we are so pleased to be here, sharing a family home at last. How was your journey home from Hogwarts? His aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange, was seated at the head of the table where Lucius normally sat for the dinner hour. It was, Draco was certain, a power move. Lord Voldemort, thankfully, was not here at the moment. It seemed that he came and went quite frequently, which Draco was happy to hear. He turned now to study her. Bellatrix had had a difficult time in Azkaban. Although he imagined that she did not look much differently than she had before she went inches, her eyes were wide. Dark pools that seemed to be both flat and of an incredible depth all at once. Her hair, black and wild, crackled with her dark magic. Her teeth were broken and gray. She looks like a far younger, albeit prettier Walburga Black, with less drool. It was very good, Aunt Bella. We played Exploding Snap. He found that, deplorable though her dental situation was, if he looked at her mouth instead of her eyes, his occlumency was easier to maintain. He knew that Narcissa's talents at legilimency were often inherited, and he took no chances. I heard there was an altercation with Harry Potter. His eyes widened slightly. How had she heard about something that happened only a few hours before? Yes. We were outnumbered and he and his friends caught us unawares, Draco mumbled, hoping this answer would suffice. Well, I am sure you will have plenty of opportune chances to return the favor to him one day soon, Bella says with a maniacal look in her eyes. She stabbed at her steak as though to demonstrate the proper revenge. Yes, I'm sure. Draco murmured and stared at his plate. Bellatrix had grown bored with him and was now questioning Narcissa about what had happened that afternoon with Peter in the handbag. Draco did not realize the importance of the handbag, so he thought it easiest to send it ahead with his trunks. He did not want to tempt a filthy muggle into stealing the bag, of course. Peter Pettigrew had been in the foyer when Narcissa and Draco had reappeared at the front door, and he was beside himself in suppressed anger. The relocation charm was not an instantaneous one, and it was not intended to be used on living beings. There was not exactly a record of what happened to the living in those few seconds between disappearance and reappearance. Though based on the antagonized state of Peter, it had not been an altogether pleasant affair. Peter now sat at the far end of the table, nibbling at his steak using only his front teeth, a nervous habit that Draco was certain was unintentional, but was no less unnerving. Were the Weasley twins there? Peter now piped up. No, they left school early this year. I believe they have premises in Diagon Alley. A joke shop, if I'm not mistaken. Draco wiped his mouth with his linen napkin to cover his smile at the thought of their memorable exit from the school this year. I never cared for them. They were often quite cruel to me. They threatened to cut off my tail or turn me into a spider several times, and they allowed that blasted Crookshanks up into the boys' dormitories on purpose. Draco found Peter Pettigrew a bit fascinating in spite of himself. The man sort of twitched his face oddly as he spoke, and occasionally ran his non-silver hand through his sparse hair nervously. What is a Crookshanks? Asked Narcissa in confusion. It's that awful cat owned by the Granger mudblood. That thing always had it in for me." Draco and his mother looked up and gave each other small smiles. Draco had never met him, but he made a mental note to buy this Crookshanks the largest pork chop that Thorn could carry once they were back at school. Oh, Lord Voldemort had come and gone periodically for the first few weeks that Draco was home, so he'd almost been lulled into a sense of calm. The Dark Lord often ate alone or with Peter Pettigrew and the snake. So as long as Draco found ways to stay busy outside of the house or in his suite, he was generally left alone. Apparently the Dark Lord was trying to stay 2 steps ahead of the Ministry of Magic, which was searching for him all across the British Isle. And so he tended to move around, not always staying at Malfoy Manor. When he was present, he had meetings with his followers. Draco overheard Bellatrix mentioning that the Dark Lord was meeting with Travers this night, then Juxon, followed by Snape another night. This news gave Draco pause. Professor Snape had seemed to work so closely with the Order. He'd been able to contact Sirius easily, though clearly Professor Umbridge had been monitoring the methods of communication in and out of the castle. He'd helped Hermione by making the recovery potions. He'd helped Draco with the Clumency, but he'd failed to teach the same skill to Potter, and he truly seemed to loathe the younger wizard wholeheartedly. Was Professor Snape truly part of the Order, or was he actually in the Dark Lord's pocket, reporting everything back to Lord Voldemort, and working towards a final trap to get Dumbledore and Potter killed? Snape was a master at Clumens capable of deep deception. Which master did he truly serve? Oh, the Daily Prophet was delivered each morning along with his breakfast, and he had taken to perusing it over his full English as a way to avoid speaking with Bellatrix. He found some of the articles amusing. The one about feeling safe in your home was especially funny considering who his current housemates were. Should you feel that a family member, colleague, friend, or neighbor is acting in a strange manner, please contact the Magical Law Enforcement Squad. He wasn't really sure what would even qualify as a strange manner at this point. Oh, but Draco could sense something different occasionally in the atmosphere of the house. Some mornings, there was a charge in the air, a crackling of ill ease or else of magical fervor that he couldn't quite place. He had only noticed it a few times when he began to sense a pattern. It seemed to happen whenever the paper reported a particularly gruesome event from the day before. The first instance of strange magic he'd felt was when the paper reported on Emmeline Vance's murder. A murder on the magical community was a rarity, and so it was reported above the top fold of the newspaper that morning. Vance, it was reported in the article, had been a resistance fighter against Voldemort during the First Wizarding War. She'd gone on to work for several years as a Mediwitch in the children's ward at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, but had never had a family of her own. Bellatrix had been especially chipper that morning, calling for both coffee and tea, requesting crepes with Nutella and strawberries. She seemed almost pleasant. Draco considered notifying the Magical Law Enforcement Squad and had to force his mouth not to smile. Oh. The second time he'd noticed something off had been a report of giants attacking and destroying several Muggle homes in the West Country. This was surprising, as giants had not been seen in Great Britain for many years. Draco thought of Hagrid and his brother and wondered how they were getting on. He'd seen Hagrid return before the end of the last school term and had nodded to him on the platform at Hogsmeade. On that day, several Death Eaters including Fenrir Greyback had appeared at breakfast, calling loudly for food and fire whiskey, wiping their dirty hands all over the tablecloths and linen napkins, leaving trails of mud and grass on the white carpeting. Greyback was much feared in the magical community, and it was clear why. His teeth, elongated and yellow even though the moon was waning, tore through his sausages and black pudding with relish. With each bite, he licked his teeth clean and grinned at Draco lasciviously. Draco had been very glad to see the back of them when they departed, but not nearly as glad as his mother seemed. Oh. Another day when the paper reported on a bridge collapsing, sending a dozen cars with 30 muggles inside of them into the water below. Bellatrix had smiled at him and called him Neffy Poo. Draco almost had his eggs come back up on him that morning. Then the papers reported about the murder of Madame Amelia Bones. This death had been surprising to Draco. He had met Madame Bones several times over the years at the Ministry and at various galas. She had always seemed capable, intelligent, no nonsense. When he was a young child, she'd spoken to him as though he were an informed adult. Something unusual among adult witches, who often treated children as either idiots or pieces of furniture. She had told him endearingly about her young niece, Susan. When Draco later met Susan at Hogwarts, he felt almost as though he already knew her. Draco wondered how Susan had taken the news of her aunt's death. That morning had been slightly different than the others. Rather than arriving to breakfast upbeat and happy, Bellatrix had skipped the meal entirely, only showing up at the end of lunch. She looked worn down and gaunt, and appeared to favor her one arm, treating it gently. She ate awkwardly with her left hand, as though the right was incapable of making a fist around her fork, or of bringing food to her mouth. Draco smiled grimly behind the novel that he was reading at the table. Evidently, Amelia Bones had not gone down without a fight. Oh. He considered telling Hermione about these moments, but he knew there would be nothing gained from this, other than to frighten her. He tried to keep their discussions of goings-on in his house vague. Merlin knew there was enough fear going around these days. He was only thankful that he'd not had a personal encounter with the Dark Lord as of yet. Whenever the man was around, Narcissa would usually come up with an errand to run, or a last-minute invitation to luncheon at a restaurant or tea at the home of an acquaintance. Oh. It was these outings that gave Draco an idea. He formulated a plan, calling Thorn to deliver a letter to Theo and making a flu call to the wizarding liaison at the Royal St. George Golf Club. Then he spoke his password into his handkerchief. "Can you meet me this weekend? I want to see you so badly. And do you have a muggle friend for Theo?" Oh. Friday morning dawned bright and sunny, with a slight breeze in the air, though Draco has a feeling that it could be cold and raining. And he'd still have a smile on his face that morning. "Draco." "Good morning," Narcissa said smoothly. "Are you ready for your weekend outing with Theodore?" "What's this, then?" Bellatrix questioned sharply, turning to look at them both over her teacup. "Draco's friend Theodore has invited Draco to a round of golf today at a muggle course in Sandwich. They are taking the train to Sandwich from King's Cross and staying the night there." Draco had told his mother all of this the night before. She could tell from his excitement then that there was more to this outing than simply golf with his friend, but wisely did not ask. "Yes, Mother, I just finished packing. We'll be staying overnight there so that we can go to the Falmouth Falcons match at Puddlemere United tomorrow." Bellatrix sniffed. "I've never understood some people's fascination for Quidditch. And just who is this Theodore?" "I believe you know his father, Tiberius not," Draco said smoothly. As Tiberius was a Death Eater, this mollified Bellatrix, who moved on from Theo to launch into a lengthy complaint about Muggle transportation and how much she looked forward to the expansion of the Flu network under the Dark Lord when he was able to rule out in the open. Draco had a feeling that Flu network expansion wouldn't exactly be at the top of the Dark Lord's agenda if he seized control. He finished breakfast quickly and stood, hoping to leave before Bellatrix changed the subject and drew him back into the conversation. "Let me walk you to the Flu, Draco." Narcissa rose from the table. "Have a fun time, Neffy Pooh," Bellatrix called snidely as they exited. "Oh." As they reached the room with the Flu, Narcissa cast a subtle muffliato on them. Draco felt it fall like a fog around them. "Did you pack your bag and keep it on your possession like I showed you?" Narcissa asked swiftly. She had been meticulous in explaining undetectable extension charms to him, and emphasizing how he must not allow his bags to leave his possession at any time, lest they were stolen or tampered with. "Yes, Mum," Draco answered as he watched her perform several protective enchantments over him, as well as one last Haminium Revelio and Zoologum Revelio to ensure that no disguised humans or animals were traveling with him. Part of him wanted to roll his eyes at the extreme security measures, but mostly he was grateful. "And you remember the charms your father taught you?" "Before third year." Narcissa seemed to stumble over her words here, and with horror, Draco realized why a second later. "Yes, Mum. For Merlin's sake, yes, I remember." It had been a most awkward conversation with his father a few years before when Lucius had taught him the contraceptive and cleansing charms. Good. This would be a disastrous time for unexpected events to occur, particularly if there were Muggle-borns involved. Draco turned pink at the turn in topic and busied himself by checking his pockets and running through a mental checklist in his head. He had his luggage miniaturized, his wand, handkerchief, potions kit, and a travel cloak transfigured to look like a Muggle jacket. "Please don't worry, Mum. I'll be careful. You stay safe here," Draco whispered as he hugged her goodbye. "I shall be fine." Narcissa smiled with confidence at him. He stepped up to the Flu, tossed a handful of green powder into the flames, and called clearly, The Standard Hotel, London. Oh. Chapter 40. And now for something completely different. In a whirl of green flames, he felt himself being pulled forward, then suddenly he stood, a little off-kilter, on the hearth of a fireplace in a small five-star hotel just down the street from King's Cross Station. A tall, thin man with a magnificent mustache stood from behind a desk to greet him, taking an unnecessarily large and ungainly goose step to reach Draco. He had an unctuous air about him, and Draco had always thought he seemed vaguely familiar. The man reminded him of someone he knew, but he could never place it. "Mr. Malfoy, hello. Your compatriot came through only a few minutes ago. I believe he is in the Loo gathering himself." "Thanks, Basil." Draco stepped forward to shake the man's hand briefly. Basil was a squib who worked at the Standard Hotel, and his fireplace served as the closest flue to King's Cross. He was an unusual man, Draco thought. He kept a Norwegian blue parrot in a cage in the corner of the office. Draco was uncertain whether the bird was dead, or rather just resting. No matter, thought Draco. Theo needed to hurry up. They would need to move quickly to meet Hermione. A door to their right opened and Theo stepped out, his face flushed and hair slightly damp from having splashed water on himself. Theo enjoyed flue travel about as much as Draco enjoyed side-along apparition. They both shook Basil's hand one more time and departed, briskly walking down Euston Road to the train station. Oh. Rather than heading towards platform 9 3/4 as usual, however, they instead hurried to a sign on a shop labeled Boots. Hermione stood outside, a large knapsack slung across her back. She wore a green sundress with yellow flowers and brown sandals. Her hair was clipped back with the barrette he had given her. She looked beautiful, radiant, sun-kissed. Draco couldn't help himself from hurrying up to her and nearly swept her into a kiss right then and there, but she held him off with a look. "Not here," she said warningly, "just in case." He understood. He had told Bellatrix that he would be going out of King's Cross Station. That wasn't the truth, but it was possible that she had sent spies to watch for him. He was counting on Bellatrix not knowing enough about British rail timetables to know which type of trains left from where. The three of them ducked inside the shop, Hermione and Theo exchanging small greetings as they went. They all took a few moments selecting several sweets and crisps, and each took a flagon of drink. Hermione's was a brown liquid with a red label. Draco chose his because it reminded him of the murky, lurid green of the black clay clit from underneath. His drink was called a Mountain Dew, so he expected it to taste light and refreshing. Theo, being partial to orange candies, chose something violently orange-colored called Tango Orange. Draco insisted on trying to pay with his own money, but when the bloke behind the counter scoffed at him, Hermione stepped in to cover it. "Draco, you can't pay with a 500 note in a small shop like this," she whispered to him, chivvying the two wizards to the shop's exit. "Where did you even get that? Those are exceedingly rare." Draco turned defensive. "My father keeps a small safe in the floors of his study full of Muggle money, just in case we need it. I took a handful of it in case we needed it." At this, he drew the notes from his pocket, showing them to Hermione. Several people walking around them openly gaped at them. Hermione hurriedly covered his hands with hers, pushing the notes into his jacket. "Draco," she hissed, "this is too much money. That's what most Muggles make in a year or two, not what a teenager carries around a train station for a weekend holiday with friends." "Merlin, this is going pear-shaped already," she moaned to herself. She watched as he carefully stowed the notes away in an inner pocket, then guided them to an empty stairwell that led to some offices. "Oh. Okay, let's go over a few things. First, Theo, your jacket is too formal for this. You could wear that to the BAFTA. Remove that and you'll be fine. Draco, we're going to need to figure out a way to change your notes." "Wait, you said £500 notes were too big. How about 100 or £50 notes?" "No, most people only use 10s or maybe £20 notes to buy things." She wrung her hands. "Brilliant then." He found a £20 note among the pile, and with a wave of his wand over the bills, they all matched, changing to the smaller denominations. "But you're underage." Hermione gasped. Granger, no one is getting reported for that unless they're doing it in front of muggles, Theo grumbled. Hurry up, I want to drink this orange pop thing. At this she seemed especially miffed, but let it go quickly. All right, where is your luggage? She asked next. Both Slytherins withdrew their luggage from their pockets, knapsacks reduced to the size of their palms. Hermione sighed. Muggles going on holiday cannot shrink their bags, so they'll need to be normally sized for when we meet up with Eliza. At this, Theo perked up. Orange pop forgotten. Tell me more about this Eliza, she sounds delectable, he purred. She's literally only told you her name, what are you faffing on about? Draco asked sharply. That's enough to be getting started with. But seriously, are we talking at this? He cupped his hands to his chest with a questioning look. At their blank expressions, he moved his hands out further and tilted his head as if to ask, here. Draco shoved him hard in the shoulder. Piss off a minute, you wanker. He turned back to Hermione. What else do we need to know? She sighed. There's too much to go over right now. It would take days, maybe weeks. Just follow my lead. If you encounter something that you don't recognize or know how to operate, just look at me. And no discussing wands, magic, beasts, or anything else from school. Eliza knows that I go to a very small and private boarding school in Scotland called Hogwarts, and she knows that you are my here. Hermione stopped and blushed a bright red. I'm your Draco smiled suggestively, taking her waist in his hands and drawing her close. Noticing Theo leaning in to watch from his step a few steps down the stairwell, Draco turned to him with a hard stare. Fine, said Theo, throwing up his hands and turning around away from them. You have 30 seconds. Draco moved one hand to the back of Hermione's head and brought her lips to his, opening his mouth at once to taste the divinity of her tongue. Her hand reached down to grab his arse through the thin fabric of his golf shorts and pull him close to her. Fuck, she was amazing, he thought. His other hand found her bum, the seam of her knickers just detectable through the thin sundress fabric. She rubbed herself on his body just a bit. He moaned involuntarily. Hem, Theo said, turning back around. That's quite enough. They separated, both flushed, and straightened their clothes quickly. They left the stairwell and made for the exit out of King's Cross. He carried his knapsack in front of himself for a few moments until his cock had settled back down. Oh. They found a large group of arriving university students just exiting a platform and blended into them, in hopes that if anyone was watching for them, they would lose them. Then it was just a short walk to St. Pancras station where they would travel to Sandwich. Eliza, Hermione called as they neared the second station. A tall, well-built blonde girl with 2 long braids turned to them, smiling broadly. She was round and soft, with huge blue eyes. If Theo had moved his hands another bit out from his chest, he still might have not gotten close, Draco thought. There you are, Hermione. I was worried you and your boys had done a bunk. Hello, Eliza. Theo had stepped in front of them, reaching to take Eliza's hand that wasn't holding her knapsack and bringing it to his lips. Kissing it once and then caressing it against his cheek. He looked deeply into her eyes and said, as if there were a chance in hell I would allow Granger here to not introduce us. Merlin and Morgana, you are about the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen. Eliza blushed a pretty pink and giggled wildly. Merlin and Morgana. Are they mates of yours? Aren't they from that King Arthur story? Hermione interrupted before Theo could utter another word. Yes, Eliza, just a silly way that some of our classmates talk sometimes. How are you doing? Have you had a good summer so far? Yeah, it's been nice, but I think it's about to get a lot better, Eliza answered, and Draco felt that Theo might have met his match. Oh. The 4 of them turned into the station and found their platform. Draco with his arm around Hermione and Theo holding his arm crooked to allow Eliza to hold onto it. Once on the train, they found 4 seats facing and spent the next 90 minutes or so in fast conversation. Eliza seemed to accept that Theo and Draco did not know much about movies and television, which suited her just as well. Her parents did not like television and didn't allow her to go to very many movies. She also seemed unfazed when they had not heard of the bands that played on the Muggle wireless. She and Theo did have a long conversation about Jurassic Park, a movie they had both seen. And because Theo had been friends with Blaze for several years, he was able to carry on a decent conversation about pop culture, politics, and books. At some point, Hermione needed to use the loo, so Draco decided to walk with her. They took their time getting back, finding an empty luggage compartment to snog in for a few minutes. When they returned to the seats they had come from, they found Theo and Eliza wrapped in each other's arms, kissing fiercely. Draco and Hermione kept walking and found 2 seats in the next car. They sat, holding hands and snuggling each other close, at times talking about school, classmates, or events from their pasts. Or just kissing. It was such a freeing experience, Draco thought, to go somewhere that no one knew your name, or feared your house guests, or cared about what your father had done. Oh. Once in Sandwich, the 4 took a taxi to the Royal St. George Golf Club. Draco had come here once before with his father and Cornelius Fudge, just before Fudge was made minister. That had been a cold, blustery day when Draco was 9. Now, more than 7 years later, it could not be a more different experience. The sun blazed overhead, and a gentle breeze came off of the ocean. The girls in their sundresses and matching tam-o-shanters looked like an advert for golfing. They golfed 9 holes with Eliza in the lead, no surprise considering that she golfed for her school team. Then they stopped for lunch, each enjoying the lamb chops, nikwe salads, and red wine. After they finished their round, Draco was pleased to see that he finished a close second to Eliza. Though he thought that there might have been a bit of luck involved or a bit of magic. He noticed that Hermione had casually waved her hand at 1 or 2 of his shots to keep them on the course. Oh. They took another hired car to the hotel, a lovely bed and breakfast in a renovated castle. Eliza was suitably impressed, although but for the modern Muggle appliances it seemed much like Draco's and Theo's homes. They had steak with peppercorn sauce, fingerling potatoes, and haricots verts, with creme brulee for dessert. Once dinner was concluded, the 4 sat in the drawing room with an older couple from Roermond, in the Netherlands. They talked for an hour or so, sipping cognac or whiskey and feeling wonderfully sated. When Eliza suggested going to bed, Theo beat a hasty retreat up the stairs, pulling her behind him. Draco raised his brows at Hermione and said, "Are you ready for bed, darling?" She met his eyes evenly and said of course. They said good night to Emily and Julian, the Dutch couple, and made their way slowly upstairs to their room, Hermione leading the way. Oh. Once inside, with the door locked and warded, Hermione asked shyly, "I just need to use the WC a moment." He pulled her close, holding her tight round the waist, and murmured into her hair, "Of course. I'll be waiting here for you. I don't want to spend a minute longer than I must without you." She disappeared into the loo, and Draco took stock of the room. A tall bed was in pride of place in the center, covered with what seemed like far too many pillows. 2 small lamps were at each side of the bed. He fumbled with one until he figured out how to turn it on. Then he realized the light was too bright, and used a spell to dim it. He repeated the task for the other lamp. Next, he removed about 8 of the pillows from the bed, leaving a modest 2 pillows behind. He drew down the sheets, took off his shoes and socks, and did a cleansing charm on his breath, popping in a spearmint lozenge for good measure. Now where to stand? Or should he sit? On the sofa or the bed? Would the bed be too presumptuous? Should he lie on the bed? That would definitely be too presumptuous. He was just debating leaning against the writing desk versus the wall when the door to the WC opened. Even in the low light of the lamps, she seemed to glow with a warm, soft light. She wore a simple night dress that skimmed the top of her thighs. Her skin was beautifully sun-kissed and soft like velvet. She walked slowly to him, and he could tell she was nervous, struggling to hold his eye contact. For his part, he could not look away even if commanded to do so. He was afraid that he might even just blink and she'd pop into non-existence like a daydream. She neared him, and the scent of gardenias overcame him, bringing with it memories of his precious moments with her over the years. "Hello," he breathed. "Hi," she said shyly. "You look magnificent," he said, breathing picking up measurably as she neared. "You look overdressed," she smiled. Draco reached behind his neck without breaking eye contact and pulled both his shirt over his head in one quick motion. He tossed it to the side quickly, and his hands, which had been gripping the front of the writing desk behind him for steadiness, reached for her tentatively. "That's better," she said with a little laugh. Her hands reached up to his shoulders and drew his lips down to hers, pressing herself up into him. Her arms came around his shoulders, running softly down his chest, scratching lightly at his skin. He held her waist, marveling at the softness and smoothness of her skin. She was warm, pliant, beautiful. He pulled her close to him, feeling her body through the thin silk of her night dress as she rubbed her body lightly against his chest. He brought his hands up and around her body to touch her tentatively lightly. Hermione, I've wanted this for so long. I've never done this before. With anyone. Then we should make it count, because I hadn't either, she said. He knew, no matter what else happened in the coming days, weeks, maybe even years, that this night was one that no amount of occlumency would ever fully erase. Oh. Chapter 41. Every little thing she does is magic. Tonight would be no less than perfect, he knew. He was in a beautiful castle, far from home, where no one knew him, with a gorgeous witch that he adored. He kissed her, pulling her to him. Her warm, soft skin under her nightdress felt like smooth velvet, and the feel of her in his arms was electrifying. As she pressed against him, he knew she could feel exactly how much he wanted her. You make me nearly mental, just thinking about you, my. I don't know what I would do without you. You drive me spare with your gorgeous lips, your eyes, your mind, your soul. You are everything to me. His nerves and excitement had him wanting to tell her everything on his mind. She smiled against his neck. You're suddenly so talkative. You've given me something to talk about, he whispered into her hair. They crossed to the bed and she lay down on the duvet. He crawled up to rest next to her, their ankles intertwined. Draco's eyes roved over the length of her, pausing in surprise to take in the sight of her toes. How are they? They're green. At his look of delight, Hermione giggled. She wondered. Your toes, well, your toenails. They're green. I've never seen such a thing. Do pureblood witches not paint their toenails? She asked, amused. I am really not sure. I've never. At this, he stopped. It dawned on him that he'd never seen a witch's bare feet to even know. I like them. They're pretty, he said. She smiled at him. I picked the color for you. Come off it, I know green's your favorite color, he teased. You're right, she said as he kissed her once more. He pulled back slightly to look her in the eye. You're certain about this, about us? He asked. Now that they were here alone together, he had to hear it from her lips. Draco, she said with a nervous smile, being with you has been an adventure, and this is just the next step for us. I care so much for you. He surged forward, certain now. They were both nervous, that much was clear, but both of them were sure that there was nowhere else each of them would rather be than here. And no one else they'd rather be here with. They were inexperienced, at times fumbling, but they figured things out together. There were a few awkward moments during which they smiled sheepishly at each other. But the fact that they were discovering this whole new world together made the moment transcend all that came before it. As their bodies and souls intertwined, he looked her in her beautiful copper eyes, stared directly into her very being, and she looked back into his with so much love and hope silver met copper. And he hoped that she could understand from his eyes how much she meant to him. My, you are so beautiful. Gods, you're amazing. I am so happy you're with me. I can't do this, any of this. I can't live my life without you, Merlin. He was talking again. And his mouth was moving ahead of his brain again. I love this. Yow, you are so beautiful. Draco, you're so good to me, Hermione said, and Draco could only marvel at her here tonight. The physical and emotional sensations they were feeling built to a fevered pitch, and after only a few moments, they flew over the edge of reason together, flinging themselves over the precipice with abandon. It was the taut, drawn-out final chords of a symphony of beauty. She collapsed against him, her cool skin meeting his heated body, snuggling herself to him. His arms came around her, holding her tight, unwilling to let her go even for a moment. Hermione, I am so he had no idea what he was going to say to finish this sentence, but he knew what words were fighting to make their way out. But a part of him did not feel as though now wasn't the best time. He didn't want her to think that he only said them because of what they had just done. Draco, the contraception charm. She suddenly sat up, grabbing his wand from the beside table and pointing it at her stomach. He placed his hand on hers as she muttered the incantation, and there was a brief warmth. At this she looked into his eyes and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use your wand. I think mine is in the lab. It's all right, but that was amazing that it worked so easily for you. He marveled. He had tried using the wands of a few friends over the years, and most were reluctant, if they even worked at all. Only his mother's wand had worked nearly perfectly for him. Oh, Well, I didn't realize Harry's works well for me, but I suppose you're right. I have tried a few spells with Parvati's, and they've never worked perfectly. Their eyes met again, two metals well matched, beaming at each other. Hermione slipped off the bed, and Draco did a few quick cleansing charms, then pulled up the sheets over himself. She returned a few minutes later, her usual gardenia scent stronger than ever, but now competing with the smell of mint. Sorry, my parents are dentists. If I go to bed without flossing and brushing, I feel guilty, she explained sheepishly. What are dentists? And what is flossing? Draco asked, now slightly more awake than he had been a few seconds before. She explained, and he was fascinated. So you don't use a tooth cleansing charm? Little ones are taught that around the same time they are taught to dress themselves in the wizarding world, he answered. Muggles have come up with ways to get around nearly everything that magic provides well, except apparition. And time travel. That's only on the telly. The teen didn't time travel, Hermione, he mumbled, half asleep. Yes, well, it turns out you don't need a TARDIS to time travel anyway. Just a necklace and a request from Professor McGonagall to the Department of Mysteries head, she said, nearly asleep herself. Draco's eyes flew open, suddenly very awake. Wait, what? Oh. Hermione's revelation about her third-year adventures in time travel took Draco by surprise. It explained so much about her constant odd appearances all over the castle that year. Thus began a lengthy discussion about time turners and time travel, which turned into a discussion about whether or not Hermione was nearly a year older than her actual age, which turned into a discussion about whether or not she was technically of majority age already, which turned into a discussion about how magical children aren't supposed to use magic outside of school, which turned into a discussion about how pureblood children are given more magical leeway than Muggleborns, considering that children are encouraged to not use magic until they are adults, but no one seems to care unless it's done in front of Muggles. In other words, the Muggleborns' extended family and friends, which turned into a discussion about how the magical community treats people and creatures that it views as less than themselves, which turned into a discussion about house elf rights, which turned into a discussion about Dobby, Winky, Whimsy, Pym, and Creature, which turned into a discussion about Star Wars and how much the house elves reminded Hermione of Yoda, because now she was quite loopy, what with it being after 3 o'clock in the morning. As they drifted off to sleep, Draco felt content and happy in a way he'd never thought possible. Tonight had been like a dream, one he never hoped to wake from. Oh. Chapter 42. Discussions, Dodge M's, Declarations, Dinner. It took a while for them to fall asleep, and when they awoke in the morning, their limbs were entwined. It was a new experience, waking up at the bright sunshine of day together. She was curled against him, arms folded and fists balled tightly against his chest. Her eyes opened, the copper darker, almost milk chocolate this early in the morning. Hello, he said, with a lazy, hapless smile at her. Good morning, she answered, kissing him chastely. He tried to deepen the kiss, but she withdrew. I've got morning breath. Allow me, he said, and he held his wand under the pillow, muttering, Gusta Spello. Did you do that wandlessly? I've only managed a few spells without a wand, she exclaimed. Draco, who had only carried off a few instances of accidental magic without a wand, was unsurprised. No, I've got my wand here. He moved his hand under the pillow sheepishly, but I appreciate the vote of confidence. She smiled playfully at him. Well, you are the second in our class. Considering the first in our class is a world-class SWAT who eats textbooks for lunch and uses time turners to take extra classes. I'm pretty sure I never had a chance at anything but second, he mused. True. His kiss was sweet and filled with longing. It promised a day filled with things nothing short of amazing. Oh. Breakfast was a bubbly affair, as Eliza and Theo had already gotten started with mimosas and full English when they arrived. Guess what? Theo invited me to stay the rest of the day with you all, so I'm not going back this morning. My mum said it was all right. Draco knew the girls had told their parents they were doing a girls' trip alone. Ah, well, that's great, but Draco gave an inquisitive look at Theo. What about that match? He and Theo had planned to stay for the Falmouth Falcons Quidditch match later in the day. Boys and their silly football. Eliza waved cheerily. There will always be another match. Let's visit the countryside. As Eliza and Theo snogged over their egg cups, Draco turned to Hermione. "What's football?" he whispered. "Quidditch on the ground, no snitch, no bludgers, no bats, no brooms, no rings," she muttered. "What else is there?" he asked, eyes wide, but dropped the question at her hardened look. Eliza had pulled herself away from Theo's lips long enough to withdraw a few brochures from under her place setting. "Who's up for an amusement park?" "Oh." Hours later, as the train trundled then back to London, Draco finally felt like his brain might be reattaching itself to whatever normally tethered it in place. Muggles had odd ways of entertaining themselves, crashing tiny vehicles into each other, strapping into small carts and whipping through loops of metal, an adventure that reminded Draco of the ride with the goblins to his family vault in Gringotts Bank and swinging high up into the sky. The last reminded him most of flying, but without the need to focus on controlling the broom. It was freeing and lovely, and he thanked Hermione and Eliza profusely for the experience. Although he really didn't enjoy the haunted house, Muggles' ideas about witches were downright frightening. Eliza was amazed that neither he nor Theo had ever been to an amusement park, and had wanted them to get the full sense of it. After the fourth bag of candy floss and fifth serving of hot donuts, Draco felt like the Dodge M's were crashing together in his stomach, and had to go sit on a bench for a while. His gaze moved from the seats down the car where Theo and Eliza had fallen asleep, fingers entwined, to Hermione, who was fighting sleep next to him, her legs draped across his, back leaning against the train wall. "Hermione?" she asked, eyes moving beneath her lids but not opening. She smiled languidly. "I love you." Her eyes flew open dazedly. "I love you," he said again, with more certainty. "Draco, she started. "No, you don't have to," he said at the same time. He didn't want her to feel that she needed to say it back. It was enough that she knew how he felt. "I love you too." It was a whisper, but she had said it. He exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They locked hands and he pulled her even closer, kissing her deeply. It was hard for him to imagine feeling any happier than he was right now. Oh. Once in London, that said their farewells. Theo quietly asked Hermione about how to use a telephone, and was disappointed to learn that there were no telephone lines at Hogwarts. But then hardened when she mentioned mobile phones, as well as how the Owl Post office in Hogsmeade could send and accept Muggle mail. He and Eliza took a short walk a distance away to bid each other farewell non-verbally. Draco took his chance to do the same. He wrapped his arms around Hermione's waist, staring down into her bright copper eyes. "I'll see you in less than 2 months, yeah?" he asked softly. 6 weeks, she answered with a smile. 5 weeks and 5 days, really, he supplied. "Who's counting, though?" she murmured, nuzzling his neck. "I am," he returned, bending to place open-mouth kisses on the shell of her ear. He felt her smile against him and squeezed her tighter. Oh. Back at the Standard Hotel, he and Theo discreetly shrank their luggage again and waited in the corridor for Basil to return from helping one of the old regulars at the hotel. "So sorry, chaps, just needed to jimmy the lock to the room for Major Gowers. Poor gent, he's a wizard but he often forgets and needs a spot of assistance." Basil unlocked the office door and led the way into the space. "Now, where did I put that flu powder?" Yes, here it is. By golly, I would lose my head if it weren't attached most days." The young wizards chuckled and readied themselves for the journey, but something caught Draco's eye. It was the Norwegian blue parrot in the cage, sitting in exactly the same position it had been in Saturday morning. "Ah, Basil, good chap." Draco turned to the tall, thin man. "Your parrot, is he all right?" "Why, yes, I believe he's jolly good." "And you're sure he's not expired?" "Expire? Oh no, the owner of the pet shop assures me that he's only resting. I tell you, boys, he's a much calmer pet than my last one, for that I'm glad. Had a rabbit last year, quite a terror he could be. He could move faster than you could blink, and ate me out of home and hearth. Such an eater." That boy Basil continued droning on about his past pets as Draco began spinning into the grate, glad to leave the unusual man behind. Oh. Back at the manor, Draco felt the unease and darkness descend upon him as easily and completely as a fog. Where before there had been light and fun, now as he looked at Bellatrix's grey teeth and dark-stained lips, he felt nothing but foreboding. "Draco, my neffy-weffy, how was the Quidditch match? Who won?" His stomach lurched. Thankfully his mother hurried in to kiss him hello. "Draco." Did you enjoy the Falcons' win, darling? I listened to the end of the match on the wireless. What a fun finish. Jacob's catching the snitch with his robes that way. He caught on quickly. Yes, it was remarkable. Quite a catch. A strong win that puts us ahead in the league. Well, now that you're back, you'll be pleased to know that we're all going to enjoy a lovely dinner together. Bellatrix smiled widely, her darkened lips stretching thin against her red gums. Lovely, echoed Draco. Oh. Draco's first encounter with Voldemort was so frightening, he'd been unable to eat. Between his weekend away and spending most of his time in his suite, he had been avoiding Voldemort so well that he'd nearly become complacent. After all, he had been home for 3 weeks without an encounter with the Dark Lord. But tonight when Draco entered the dining room, he was already seated, clad in dark robes and looking truly creepy. Draco was unsure what to expect of the Dark Lord. In his mind, he pictured the man as tall, broad, and overbearing with dark features, almost like a dark-haired and dark-eyed Lucius Malfoy. The reality was highly disconcerting. He was tall, yes, but the Dark Lord's skin was a pallid grayish-white. He had no hair, no nose, and nearly no lips, only an odd gash for a mouth. But it was his red eyes that made Draco's skin crawl. They seemed to be able to see minute details, but reflected nothing in their matte depths. Draco's immediate impression was that if a Dementor had a proper face, this was what it would look like. Oh. Other than a nearly whispered good evening to Draco and the 2 witches, a greeting returned with politeness and deference. The Dark Lord stayed silent throughout the meal. Draco picked at his salmon, like a man waiting for a summons to the guillotine. During the second course, his pocket where he kept his handkerchief warmed. He pushed thoughts of Slytherin Quidditch practice to the front of his mind and began breaking down potions' ingredients, distilling memories. Finally, as the desserts were served, Lord Voldemort spoke. Draco. Voldemort spoke in a high, breathy timbre that contrasted oddly with the malice in his eyes. I am pleased to see you here for the summer. We have much work to do, and I know that I can count on your loyalty. He chanced a quick look at his mother across the table, who merely gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Yes, my lord, Draco said quietly. Draco will be most honored to stand by your side as the head of the Malfoy family, my lord. He will assuredly bring honor to this house. Bellatrix spoke with a supercilious tone of respect that Draco had never heard from her. Yes, Lord Voldemort said, drawing out his S in a way that made Draco's skin crawl. Let us, however, discuss our plans on a different evening. I must rest now. Wormtail. At the summons, Peter Pettigrew scurried out of his hiding place behind a large sculpture, bowing to Lord Voldemort as he walked swiftly to him. I am tired from my long journey in the night. Draco and the 2 women were chivied out of the room by the little rat man. Draco was confused until his mother whispered, He is still a bit weak from his recovery, and he was traveling last night. That takes its toll on him. He sometimes needs help walking and doesn't want anyone to see it. That seemed odd to Draco. If he went to Hogwarts around 50 years ago, the man should only be about 65 or so. For a wizard, this was barely middle-aged, nowhere near elderly. Mother, I must see to my schoolwork. Draco bowed slightly to his mother and aunt and turned to the stairs that led to his wing of the manor. He had been using the excuse of summer reading and essays to spend time alone in his room away from Bellatrix and his mother. He had tried for the first several days to act as a shield for Narcissa, to take some of the pressure off her in having to entertain and distract the manic woman, but Narcissa had insisted that she was all right, and that Draco needed to focus on his occlumency and stay out of Bellatrix's sight. Oh. As soon as he reached his room and warded the space, he withdrew his handkerchief and spoke, Vinca Major. Hermione's words bloomed into sight. How are you doing? Did you make it home all right? He answered, Yes, I'm back home. Her reply was immediate. Have you seen Bee since your return? Has she mentioned anything more about you standing in for your father? Draco sent back quickly. V arrived back here this morning. I just met him, and we had dinner as a group together. Told me there was much to be done and that he was counting on my loyalty. Said we would discuss it later. There was a bit of a pause before she responded. What is he like? Gives me the creeps. I don't like him. He's got red eyes. And Bee somehow reins in all her crazy around him. Not sure which is worse, her being insane or her bottling all that insanity up to use later. What do you think he's going to make you do? I don't know. I'll update you as soon as I do. They exchanged goodnights and wishes for sweet dreams, but Draco was afraid that didn't matter at all. After the encounter with Lord Voldemort, he was not sure if any dream would ever be sweet again. Chapter 43. The Mission. What have you and the Weasel's family been getting up to? Draco asked her a week or so later. After spending a few weeks with her parents in the mundane world, Hermione decided to visit the Weasley family at their home. Departing a few days after returning from their holiday to Sandwich, she had now been there a few days. Draco knew she slept in a bedroom with the youngest Weasley, the girl of the painful and nasal-clearing bat bogey Hex. But he also had eyes and could tell that Weasley liked Hermione. He worked to keep his jealousy tightly sealed in a potions flagon in his mind's cupboard. He had no control over the Weasel's actions, but he felt certain that Hermione wouldn't be interested in the ginger. Still, the thought of the two of them cozying up over late-night hot chocolate or midday strolls in the garden rankled him. Molly is in a right state. Between Fleur being here all summer and the twins starting this new venture, she's hardly calmed down all summer. Harry is here too, he's been here a week. Too many people. Draco smiled, imagining the state of things there. He didn't know Molly Weasley other than to see her offer comfort to Diggory's parents after the Triwizard Tournament. But she seemed like the type that never really calmed down, having her oldest son marrying a French girl who had boys falling all over her everywhere she went, and 2 sons quit school with mere weeks left to go before graduation. It had to have been a difficult summer to be in charge of the Weasley clan. All that being said, Draco would gladly have spent all summer listening to a Mother Weasley rant over having a single dinner with the Dark Lord. Don't let the Weasleys get you down. I'll write back when I can. Oh. Dinner that evening had languished long past the point of comfort for Draco. His occlumency had been tested, he was certain. There had been a moment over the soup course in which he'd felt a chill and a quick, dull pain, like a cold spoon probing into his brain. Before he'd realized it, he had put his hands to his temples, scrunching his eyes with the discomfort. He fired up a memory of a particularly rainy and windswept Quidditch match against Hufflepuff in second year. Asphodel, Gertie Roots, Salamander Tails. Lord Voldemort may have been a highly skilled Legilimens at one time, but this skill had clearly diminished either with time, his use of dark magic, or his unusual revival from wherever he had been. Draco hoped he wouldn't improve with practice. If it hurt like that every time, he'd at least have warning. Are you all right, Draco? His mother asked in concern. Yes, just a slight headache. I'm sure it's just the change in weather, going so quickly from cool to warm. Draco knew that if he called attention to it, expressed any idea that he knew exactly what had happened, the Dark Lord would try to be more careful. Less obvious next time. He blamed the sudden warmth outside today had dawned sunny and warm, unlike the previous cool, gloomy days before. He had tried to take advantage of it by taking his Nimbus 2001 out for a while, but his heart wasn't in it. Yes, it was particularly miserable today, said Bellatrix. Oh. After dinner, he found himself alone with Voldemort, Narcissa and Bellatrix retiring to the solarium, and Peter well. Draco couldn't be arsed to care where Peter was, he was just glad the Rat Man was gone for a few days. They walked leisurely to his father's study, with Voldemort unlocking the door as though it was entirely within his right. Draco resented the intrusion on behalf of his family. Though he didn't feel much love for Lucius, it was still difficult to watch this monster sitting at his father's desk. Draco. I am pleased to have a moment to talk, wizard to wizard. How are your studies going at Hogwarts? What OWLs did you take? Draco was momentarily speechless. He was asking about Draco's studies. Ancient runes, arithmancy, astronomy, care of magical creatures, charms, defense against the dark arts, divination, herbology, history of magic, potions, and transfigurations, my lord. That is quite an impressive list. 11 OWLs is a very great accomplishment. Thank you, my lord. And I understand that you play Seeker in Quidditch. As well, a prefect. That is a busy schedule to keep. And you likely have a few witches to keep your bed warm as well, I suppose. In his mind, Draco chopped daisy roots and stirred peppermint and syrup of hellebore counterclockwise 8 times. You are correct, my lord. It is a busy schedule, but I enjoy my time there. Voldemort flicked his wand in Draco's direction, and Draco fought not to flinch. Behind him, he heard the clink of highball glasses being filled with ice and a crystal decanter being opened. "Shall we share a drink to toast your 11 OWLs?" Voldemort's high, clear voice grated on Draco's senses. "Thank you, my lord." Draco heard one of the glasses crash back to the tray. The ice and fire whiskey spilled, dripping down the side of the table. "May I assist with the drinks, my lord?" Draco asked solicitously. "No, I do not wish it. I prefer to make my own," Lord Voldemort said crisply. In truth, Draco knew that he preferred Pettigrew to fetch his food and drinks, and that the Rat Man tested all of the Dark Lord's food before it was eaten. His mother had mentioned this days ago, because with Wormtail away from the manor the last several days, Bellatrix had performed this task instead. The drink righted and refilled itself, then levitated its way to Draco, while Lord Voldemort sailed across the room into his outstretched hand. After a moment, Voldemort spoke again. "Draco, your family's loyalty means a great deal to me. This is why I was so disappointed in your father's failure earlier this year." "I understand, my lord. I have decided that you shall have the chance to make this grievance up to me. It is a big honor, a very great honor indeed." To Draco's ears it sounded like anything but an honor. "Yes, my lord." Questioned Draco. "I have a task for you to complete. It is of highest importance, and it is a task that I can trust to no one else." Once again, the last letter of Lord Voldemort's words dragged out sinisterly. Draco was silent, tense, waiting. He had learned that, in situations in which the other person had the upper hand, it was better to wait for other person to speak if possible. The battle at the Ministry was a difficult one, as I'm sure you know. Many of my most faithful followers were captured. I expect them to be free again soon, but I do not know when this will happen. In the meantime, I find that there is a task that must be carried out by a loyal, well-placed servant. Here, Lord Voldemort stopped for a coughing fit. Once it has passed, he took a long sip of his fire whiskey and continued. "Bellatrix assures me of your loyalty, and you are already very well placed for this task. If you fail, I cannot guarantee your safety, or that of your family. Will you accept this task?" Draco knew that this question was more of a formality than a real curiosity. If he were to refuse, he knew it would spell his torture, his mother's torture, and quite possibly his own death. "Of course, my lord." Draco still has no idea what this task involved, but he was certain it would not be simple or easy. "Very well. The task is simple. You must kill Albus Dumbledore." "Oh." Draco was uncertain how he got back to his suite that night. The blood seemed to have vacated his head, but hadn't recollected anywhere else in his body, his entire being felt numb and cold. It was an impossible task, regardless of his advanced age and what nonsense Bellatrix and the Daily Prophet had been spouting for months. Dumbledore was the most powerful wizard of their time. He had defeated Voldemort himself only a few months before. He was a beloved headmaster, wise and intelligent beyond most. There was no chance that Draco could defeat him. It was a death sentence to even try. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sitting there in a shocked stupor when his handkerchief warmed in his pocket. With trembling hands, he removed it from its hiding place and somehow choked out the words, "Vinca Major." "How was your day?" It took him a moment to form the words. "Dinner with him." There was a long pause before a reply came back. "Did he ask you to do anything?" Draco thought hard about what to write. This impossible mission was not something he could share with Hermione. To kill Dumbledore would not only be difficult, it would be nearly impossible for Draco. If she knew that he'd even been asked to do so, that he had accepted such a heinous assignment, she would never look at him the same way again. He answered. He didn't ask anything. It was the partial truth. There had been no real asking, only a telling, a demand on Voldemort's part. But Draco needed time before he told anyone about this. Time to figure this out, to decide what to do. Oh. His mother, however, seemed to already know when he went down for breakfast the next morning. She hugged him hard and held his hands and his gaze far longer than normal before Bellatrix entered. That night, a soft knock on the door revealed his mother. Her eyes were bloodshot, hair hanging lank from her bun. She entered without a word, closing the door silently and crossing to the far wall, turning on the wireless with her wand as loudly as she dared to drown out the sound of their voices. Draco looked at her, his own face flooded with fear. "Mom, I don't know what to do. If I can't do what he wants, he'll kill me, kill all of us." My dragon, I understand. I didn't want this for you, too kind-hearted. It will not be possible for you to. I am going to try to work something out. Narcissa was trying to remain calm, but her frantic eyes betrayed her. Mother, what are you talking about? There's no working this out. He's going to kill me if I can't kill Dumbledore. I just hope he doesn't kill you as well. At this, Draco could no longer hold in his tears. Because he knew that in his hour of failure, in his final torture, his occlumency would be at his weakest. At that point, everyone he knew, his mother, Hermione, Theo, Blaise, even Snape, would be in danger. It would be better to kill myself now, he thought. But looking into his mother's eyes, seeing the pain and fear and worry there, he knew he could not do that to her. Oh. The following night, his mother gave him a stern look over dinner that reminded Draco of years past, in which Narcissa would warn him to behave himself in public or else. He found himself sitting up straighter in his seat. At the end of dinner, she gave an imperceptible jerk of the head towards the door when Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix were not looking. Mother, may I be excused? I'd like to listen to the end of the Falcons match. If they win, they advance in the league. Of course, Draco. He stood and made a hasty escape, doubling back as silently as he could once the doors had swung shut. He concealed himself behind a large bust on a plinth. After a few minutes, Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix left the dining room, speaking in hushed whispers. My lord, may I bring you something to drink in your quarters? Perhaps we can discuss your plans for the Ministry of Magic. Bellatrix's voice was once again controlled, though barely. No, I do not wish it. I've told you, I have no need for your particular kind of company anymore. Bellatrix looked around wildly as though worried someone might overhear. Draco fought to make himself as small as possible, cringing with disgust. And you feel Draco can complete his mission? It seemed difficult for Bellatrix to disguise her scorn and disbelief. He must. Sissa thinks it will be difficult for him. She must not speak of it to anyone. Yes, my lord, she knows. Find an elf. Nagini must be milked, I need it. This food is quite rich, I cannot handle it so often. At this, Voldemort started to the grand staircase and Bellatrix to the kitchens. Draco wondered briefly if the elves refused to answer to her call. Oh. After a moment, the dining room door opened a small crack. Draco. He hurried back into the dining room, where Narcissa closed and warded and silenced the room. I will be out of the manor tonight, Draco. Ward your doors and use your occlumency while I am away, she said in a whisper. Where are you going? Draco was trying not to panic. This was the first time his mother had left him alone in the house with his Aunt Bellatrix and Lord Voldemort. Peter Pettigrew had been away for a week or so at this point, and Voldemort's isolation without the rat-faced man had drawn the Dark Lord out of his rooms far more often than was usual. I need to pay someone a visit. Do not trouble your mind about it, my dragon. She slipped away quickly before anyone could notice that they had been alone in the room together. Oh. As she was the brightest witch of her age, Hermione could tell that Draco was hiding something. She said, so the next time she wrote, Please, just tell me what it is. I can't help if I don't know anything. There's no way for you to help. It's not something in which you should be involved, my. Draco, please trust me. He could not respond for a moment. Then finally, Hermione, I do trust you, but I cannot talk about anything. He trusted her more than she knew. It was himself and his own abilities that he didn't trust. Oh,